What if Rose hadn't been there to shield Garnet and Pearl from the diamond's corrupting light? What if she couldn't stop Earth's guardians from descending into madness, one by one? Steven would be born into a world without the crystal gems to protect or guide him, a world completely unrecognizable from the one we know, overrun by corrupted gems. That is the premise of Absolute Steven Universe. Inspired by DC Comics' Absolute Universe, creator Lucky Strife Art has crafted their own take on Steven Universe, featuring fresh designs, new characters, and a brand new storyline. In this timeline, Rose was unable to save her comrades from the corruption blast, leaving her completely alone on Earth. This plunged her into a deep depression. She completely isolated herself from the world for years, and when she finally re-emerged, she abandoned her gem past and tried to blend in with humanity as best as she could. The story begins with Greg taking Steven camping in the woods, when suddenly, Greg is attacked by a corrupted gem that injures him severely. At that moment, Steven's powers manifest for the very first time, but not with Rose's protective and healing abilities. Instead, it's Pink Diamond's destructive scream. With a single blast, the gem is shattered, but the attack triggers a landslide that ends up killing Greg in the process. Steven is left horrified, devastated, and completely alone. In a total state of shock and grief over what just happened, Steven runs deeper and deeper into the woods. Some time passes and he realizes he's lost, but he doesn't care. He has nothing and no one to go back to anymore. When it starts to rain, he seeks shelter in a nearby cave, and just as he begins to drift off to sleep, another gem monster appears and lunges at him. Steven shuts his eyes tightly, bracing for impact, but the blow never comes. Instead, he hears a shriek piercing the air. Steven opens his eyes and sees a massive bird-like gem, Corrupted Pearl, fighting the other creature until she pins it down. Steven watches the situation in shock, and when the fight is over, the two beasts turn to look at him, their eyes burning with animal instinct. They stare at him intently, but they don't attack. A wave of fear paralyzes Steven, tears streaming down his cheeks, but the beasts slowly approach and begin to drink his tears. Their gemstones glow brightly for a moment, and after that, the two creatures look at him with a softer expression and a new level of awareness behind their eyes. That is how Steven meets Pearl and Garnet. After the two corrupted gems drink Steven's tears, just like what happened with Centipedal, this restores a small fraction of their consciousness. For now, their physical forms don't change. They simply regain a piece of their minds and manage to soothe their hostile nature. Even though they've never met Steven before, or even know he exists, somewhere deep down they seem to sense that this being was once their old friend and leader. So Garnet and Pearl, in their corrupted forms, act as a sort of animal guides for Steven, helping to protect them and leading him toward important gem structures. Sometimes Steven can even enter their minds while dreaming. Though these visions are highly cryptic, he slowly begins to piece together the gem's origins, as well as his own. Every now and then, Steven has to heal them again, or else they will revert to their hostile behavior, and that will get a lot easier once Steven discovers his healing powers, and his healing spit. This absolute version has all the same powers as the original Steven, but as mentioned earlier, Pink's destructive powers manifest first, since he has no preconceived ideas about Rose or what her abilities were. Because of this, the powers Steven does have are used differently, reflecting the harsher and more brutal conditions of this universe, alongside a narrative much more focused on combat. Absolute Steven uses three main powers throughout most of the story. First, pink light constructs. Steven learns to emit pink constructs and uses them to form weapons, create barriers or shields, and even form simple objects like a chain or a chair. At first, these constructs are very weak and imprecise, but over time they become stronger and more complex. Second, plant manipulation, or phytokinesis. This power fits perfectly because this Steven spends most of the story living in the wild, a power that was somewhat underutilized in the original show. Absolute Steven uses it to attack or immobilize enemies poison ivy style, create small structures like bridges or shelters, and even grow food. And finally, shapeshifting. Steven doesn't fully transform, but he does morph parts of his body to gain animal traits in specific situations, like growing fangs or claws to fight, or enhancing his legs or arms for better mobility. This emphasizes the fragile, feral situation this Steven lives in, as well as his close relationship with a very important character. Amethyst plays a very different role in this story. Since Rose abandoned the kindergarten, and Garnet and Pearl are corrupted, she feels just as alone in the world as Steven does. She was born with no knowledge of her origins, knowing she's a gem, but not really understanding what that means. She knows she's meant to fight, but she doesn't know who she's supposed to fight against. This version of Amethyst is more reserved than the one we know from the show. She still has her fun, rebellious side, but she's much more of a loner and less familiar with human culture. In this universe, she's a sort of bounty hunter, tracking down corrupted gems and bubbling them, not to protect anyone, but as training and a test of strength. Amethyst acts as a kind of big sister and mentor to Steven. Even though they are very different, they are both lost gems in a world without knowing who they truly are, which is why they decide to work together to uncover their origins. Her design isn't too different from the Amethyst we know and love. She's just a bit more serious and a little less messy. Since the crystal gems aren't around to protect Earth, governments and corporations started researching and exploiting their technology. That's where the Maheshwarans come in. In this universe, they work for an organization as a slightly mad scientist duo, researching and experimenting with gems and gem tech to harness their power, and their daughter, Connie, works as their assistant. She firmly believes in her parents' work and does everything she can to learn and help them. But when Steven, a human gem hybrid, is captured, Connie forms a bond with him. That's when she has to choose between helping her parents or betraying everything she knows to help Steven. Her design keeps her glasses, because Steven was never there to heal her eyesight. It's a balance between her role in the lab and the fact that she's still just a kid caught up in something way too big for her. She carries a prototype gem destabilizer, an invention of her parents for self-defense. It's not as powerful as a homeworld destabilizer, but it could definitely temporarily neutralize certain gems. This story is currently just a concept for a much larger idea. However, we have been shown character designs that appear later in the series, both allies and villains. Lapis Lazuli shows us the horrors that can unfold when tampering with things beyond our comprehension. She's introduced into the story when our protagonists visit Ocean Town, a place reported as a hotspot for gem activity. They go looking for answers, but have no idea what's coming. They discover that the small coastal town is in ruins and almost entirely abandoned. There are signs of an evacuation everywhere, unlocked vehicles and empty stores. Everything points to the evacuation being quick and urgent. As they explore the eerie place, Steven starts feeling sick, an intense thirst, pressure in his chest, heavy breathing, and then a whisper begins echoing in his mind. "Help me. Save me." They finally find the last remaining inhabitants of the town. They're standing on the beach, completely motionless, trapped in a trance, only repeating a single phrase over and over. "Catch it. Help me. Save me." Their empty eyes are fixed on the nearby cliffs. Disturbed by the scene, the group heads up there to find the source of the mystery. At the top, they find a breathtaking sight. A massive water vortex spinning violently, and inside it, the ruins of a destroyed building. The gems try to cross the barrier, but every attempt is blocked by ice spikes shooting out from the surface. Then, Steven yells into the waves, "We're gems! We're here to help!" After a moment, the vortex stops and opens up. The group walks inside, finding what used to be a laboratory, seemingly abandoned only recently. In the middle of the lab sits a massive, corroded machine, with wires and pipes sprouting out in every direction. And at its center, tangled in a web of cables, is a silver mirror with a cracked blue gemstone on the back. Steven approaches slowly, the whispers in his mind turning into screams. He grabs the blue gem, covered in cracks and surgical incisions, and with all his might, rips it from the machine. The metal collapses, a blinding blue light fills the room, the vortex drops, and the light begins to take a human shape. Lapis Lazuli, is free. In this universe, Lapis's mirror fell into the hands of CARE, Crystal Anomaly Research and Extermination, a top-secret private organization with massive government influence. They monitor and study gem activity around the world. They use Lapis as a power source for one of their facilities, without truly understanding the danger they were messing with. After years of imprisonment, a failed experiment gave her a tiny window of opportunity to unleash her power, and Lapis took it. She destroyed the lab, wiped out her captors, and manipulated the minds of the townspeople. Driven by his empathy, Steven sets her free without understanding the consequences. But to Lapis, Earth isn't a home, it's a prison, and every human is her jailer. Her gem is severely damaged, so using her powers causes her extreme agony and distorts her physical form. Even so, she decides to travel with the group while they look for a way to heal her gem and return home. In this timeline, Peridot arrived on Earth long before the events of the story. CARE detected her presence and captured her immediately. They stripped her of her lemon enhancers and started interrogating her. But upon realizing her vast knowledge of gem tech, they made her an offer: work for them. If she accepted, she'd have access to unlimited resources and absolute scientific freedom. If not, they would extract the information by force. Out of options, Peridot accepted. She sent a fake report to Homeworld stating her mission was over. For years, she turned CARE into her personal lab, but over time, she grew to despise humans and miss Homeworld. So she began crafting a plan to escape, but everything changed when she heard about a human-gem hybrid. Long before meeting Lapis, Steven gets into an argument with Amethyst about humans. She insists they are cruel, but Steven insists they can be good. Frustrated, he goes for a walk by himself and stumbles upon a small scientific camp. There he meets the Maheshwaran family. They talk, share some food, and even split a sandwich. For a moment, Steven feels normal, but then a corrupted gem attacks. Steven uses his powers to trap it with vines bursting from the ground while the scientists watch in shock. Dr. Maheshwaran smiles and poofs the gem using a destabilizer baton. Steven is horrified, and she simply responds, "These creatures are a plague." When she tries to examine Steven, he runs away, putting up a pink barrier and disappearing into the woods. The doctor surveys the area, and then spots the half-eaten sandwich Steven left behind. That tiny detail would change everything. Sometime later, Steven starts to feel like he's being watched. He hears rustling in the bushes and sees shadows moving, until one night he finally spots it. A creature emerges from the darkness. It has his face, but twisted. Pointy ears, a black nose, and inhuman eyes. The creature begins to convulse, and in the chaos, it scratches Steven and drinks his blood. That's when its body begins to mutate. From the light, Lion emerges. In this story, Lion is a CARE experiment created using DNA extracted from Steven's sandwich. They tried to engineer their own human gem hybrid, and Lion was the result. An unstable being, but also one that managed to escape and track Steven down. And finally, we get to the most dangerous character in this AU, Absolute Jasper. More violent, more brutal, but also much more strategic than in the original show. She arrives on Earth after receiving a report from Peridot, and when she finally tracks down Steven and his crew, she defeats them effortlessly. Even Garnet falls to her. Steven tries to use his powers, but Jasper knocks him out cold. From that moment on, she becomes obsessed with him because she recognizes something in Steven, something she hasn't felt since she fought Rose Quartz. At this point, we can see that life in the world of the Absolute Steven Universe AU can be pretty bleak. We see vastly different versions of the characters, yet they retain the core of their personalities, and just like in the original series, everything gets better when you have people by your side. Now it's time to talk about fusions, more specifically, Steven's fusions. Steven and Amethyst fusion, Smoky Quartz. In this universe, Steven and Amethyst's dynamic is very different. Amethyst is more of a mentor figure, serious and reserved. They are both outsiders who see reflections of themselves in each other, forming a bond rooted in their shared feelings of isolation and their search for purpose. In this universe, they work together to unravel the mystery of their origins. With Garnet and Pearl lost to corruption, and Lapis dealing with a damaged gem, the two of them are the only physically sound members of the group. This results in an intensely driven fusion. Smokey manifests out of a raw need to protect and survive. This fusion is the group's defender, a fierce guardian fueled by the heavy sense of responsibility Steven and Amethyst share for failing to protect their friends. Personality-wise, Smokey is disciplined and reserved, but in combat, their only goal is taking down the enemy, even if it means making risky calls. And while it might not be obvious at first glance, this version of Smokey is still plagued by a deep fear of weakness and failure, something that is only amplified by the desperate situations they usually spawn into. A brand new character is the fusion between Steven and Lapis, called Lapidolite. After Steven frees Lapis from her prison at the research facility, she becomes obsessed with finding a way off Earth to get back home. At this point in the story, Steven doesn't fully understand his powers or his mother's legacy yet, so he has no idea he can heal Lapis's gem. The group accompanies Lapis to various abandoned Gem Empire facilities, searching for a way to repair her gem or escape the planet. During these expeditions, Lapis begins to bond with the group, though she avoids talking about her past. Steven tries to help her work through her trauma and view Earth in a more positive light. Eventually, after countless failed attempts, Lapis grows increasingly desperate, until she ends up trapped alongside Steven in a situation neither can escape from. Lapis starts to panic, feeling like a prisoner all over again, while Steven tries to comfort her. And in that exact moment, two vastly different beings achieve a profoundly human moment of mutual understanding, triggering their fusion. Thus, Lapidolite is born, allowing them to escape with ease. When they unfuse, Lapis's gem is fully healed, having been in direct contact with Steven's power. But without a doubt, the most iconic fusion of the series is Steven and Connie, Stevani. In this universe, as I mentioned at the beginning, Connie is the daughter of two top care scientists. From a young age, she was raised to believe that gems are a threat that must be controlled or eliminated, a worldview that shatters when she bonds with Steven. Through their encounters, Connie begins to question everything she was taught, since Steven embodies the exact opposite of what her parents always preached. This reaches a boiling point when, during a mission led by her mother, Connie throws herself in harm's way to save Steven from an attack. In that moment, Stevani is formed for the very first time. To her parents, it's a terrifying sight. Their daughter just fused with a gem. On the flip side, Steven fusing with corrupted gems is a wild concept that really lets the imagination run wild. The creator wanted to explore concepts the original show never could, because, well, why not? Thanks to Steven's diamond powers and his healing abilities, he could fuse with corrupted gems without being infected by the corruption. However, these fusions would operate very differently. The dominant personality would be Steven's, but it would be warped by the corrupted gem's animalistic instincts. In the case of Rainbow Quartz 2.0, Steven inherits only a slight trace of Pearl's elegance, and his behavior becomes much more erratic. These fusions also lose access to a lot of abilities, relying much more on physical combat and brute strength. During the fusion, Steven can see fragments of the gem's mind from before the corruption, discovering who they truly used to be. And that's how we wrap up this story, at least for now, since its creator, Lucky Strife Art, is still actively developing it and coming up with exciting new ideas. So don't forget to support them and follow their social media linked in the description, so we can keep exploring this incredibly fascinating Steven Universe AU.